Hello and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give a couple of minutes to allow for people to join us. Feel free to introduce yourself, where you're calling in from, and your organization in the chat so we can see where everyone's calling in from. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Board Leadership and Governance Training Manual webinar. Feel free to introduce yourself and your organization in the chat. I see many are joining us from many different countries. We'll go ahead and get started now with our introduction. Next slide, please. Sorry. That's all right. Please continue to let us know where you are from in the chat. I see many people are sharing their organization and their country. Thank you for participating. Throughout today's webinar, if you at any time have questions, please use the Q&A box to ask those questions. We have our excellent presenters and facilitators here and available to answer any questions you might have. We'll also have some ways for you to receive the recording and the presentation after this webinar. So at the ASAP resources page, and I'll send that link in the chat shortly. Next slide, Petra. This webinar is facilitated and run by the ASAP2 USAID-funded project. The purpose of ASAP2 is to rapidly prepare local partners to have the capabilities and resources to serve as prime partners for USAID programming in compliance with USAID and PEPFAR procedures. We have two strategic objectives at ASAP2. The first is to strengthen local partners as they transition to receive PEPFAR funding as a USAID prime partner to comply with regulations. And the second is to prepare local partners to directly manage, implement, and monitor PEPFAR programs and maintain consistent PEPFAR program achievement and quality. Next slide, please. We have 18 total supported ASAP2 countries, all listed here. I see many of you are calling in from ASAP supported countries. We have some additional countries we supported in our ASAP1 phase of our project. And I see some of you are still participating with us by joining these webinars today. So thank you so much for joining. Next slide. Couple key results from ASAPs 1 and 2. ASAP has supported 126 local organizations in 18 different countries. 113 of those were local partner organizations and 13 were local government partners. So G2G support. Next slide, please. Many of our webinars are available on our ASAP resources page. USAID and ASAP have broadcasted 105 different webinars for more than 22,000 attendees in 76 different countries so far. Most of our webinars are available in 3 different languages, in French, Portuguese, and of course in English, as we are presenting today. Next slide, please. We have many upcoming webinars. This is the second part of our leadership manual webinar. For those of you who joined us on Thursday, for the first part, will be a similar presentation with some expansions on certain topics. And we have many upcoming webinars, including USG rules and regulations this coming Thursday, institutionalizing good human resources practices, non-US local partners mandatory/required as applicable standard provisions, amongst many others. So feel free to register for any of our upcoming webinars. They should be engaging and a space for you to ask questions. Next slide, please. Today we have an excellent presenter. Petronella serves as our ASAP2 capacity advisor for governance and executive leadership and has been with ASAP since 2019. She's a recipient of the UK Queen's Honor of the OBE and former executive director for health system strengthening and capacity building for Deloitte and Touche. Petronella serves as governance and executive leadership capacity advisor for ASAP2, as I mentioned, and she's an expert in organizational development and behavior strategic planning, risk and performance management. Petronella has customized organizational programs in multiple African countries to enhance responsible leadership, align workforces with strategic goals, and implement sustainable practices. Petronella has an executive master of business administration from Astridge and a Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences. She's an excellent advisor for us and has done many webinars with us before. So thank you, Petronella, for joining us. We also have Mesmi Abogo, who is another ASAP2 capacity advisor, and he will be available to answer and facilitate questions as well. So thank you, Petronella, so much. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Melissa. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I am just trying to get my slides moving. Welcome again to those who were with us last week. And of course, I'm expecting that we'll have some new people here. So I do hope that we will be able to still have really some open dialogue and or new things that we will be discussing on this massive agenda of board governance and executive leadership. So I will be presenting on the focus and objectives of this training manual, which the ASAP manual, which we are now launching, very much looking at module 1, 2, 3, and 4. One being very much about what is board governance and looking at the roles and responsibilities of the board, and that links us nicely into the fully functioning board. And I'm sure most of us working out there, we often have some key questions and indeed challenges around some of these key areas. So I hope this will kind of, be insightful, but also be an opportunity for us to find out from yourselves what else, how you find your boards and indeed your structures. And then the all-important role of the board, very much about risk management. We'll be talking about what it is and its importance for the board, but also executive leadership. And then, of course, looking at performance management. What would you, key areas that you should be looking to focus on moving on after, you've, trained your staff. So, just to say the training manual itself, it's quite a big document which has these key sections, but a lot of focus tools, as well as examples of good practice, as well as exercises. So it's going to be a useful tool for most of us out there in your organizations for training most of your staff on. So I hope it will be very useful indeed. So why did we develop this tool? Very much the training manual is about, at ASAP, we decided to look to improve the capacity of our local partners, something that we are doing, and executive directors. So it's not just about the board, but very much looking at the role of the executive director and key word that I often use here is alignment, and also to support them in adopting some of these good leadership and governance practices. The tool, the manual will very much also support our capacity advisors in training, mentoring, coaching respective board leaders, because each organization out there has, has got a board or is in the process of setting up one. And it's very much about that support, that coaching that comes with it. And within this manual, there are a lot of sections that would assist colleagues in actually setting the tone, in their, the organizations that they're working with and serving them, ensuring that they're serving those organizations well. It will also assist our local partners to manage as prime partners with effective boards, because again, our key stakeholders, some of our donors and other organizations that you may be working with within your local partnership, a key thing is whether your organization has got that ability to be a prime. And one of the key things we look at, it's not just a board, but it has to be an effective board. And that's what it sums it up to, really. As Melissa alluded to, some of the work we've done, local partner meetings, as well as, facilitating previous training sessions on this, and, and indeed, one-on-one training sessions with the local partners. So for instance, we've got a comment here from Dr. Ogilo. One of the key organizations I certainly worked with, when I started with ASAP, he said the board training is an area that had previously given us some headaches. But this time we took some time before the new board came in to work with ASAP 2 to train the new board and help them understand what was going on. He then reiterated that even after the board training was over, ASAP continued to follow up. And that was me working with them. I was with them. It's what I would call hand holding. I've been with, like he says here, Petronella has been with us following up and reviewing the policies. These have been very helpful. This has been an invaluable support. So what this is talking to is this approach that we have at ASAP, which is very much solution oriented, supporting people like the executive director of AFTA. And then I think I've got one more here, from Ato Akelu Nega in Ethiopia, Ishdu, where again he says the training provided to the board totally changed them. 5 are women and 6 are men, but of different personalities and different expertise. They're really working well and supporting us these days. What we learned now is that the board has to be committed. Above all, they have to be responsible for the organization's needs. It is the board that decides the policies and the strategy plan, almost guiding the organization. So when I speak to the other organizations about boards, this is the executive director here, some organizations are not confident enough in their advisory boards. Our board members are very good examples of the board we are supposed to have. So this was from ISHDU, and a really big organization that I visited and also worked with them on. So just sharing some of the feedback we've had. And of course, I participated in the local partner meeting, ASAP meeting, November 2022, and my colleague, Mesmi, who's online with me here, also facilitated the recent one, the last November 2023. And the feedback from that was very much very positive. Building, if when they were asked what was your favorite session, it was the building effective boards, leadership builds or destroys an NGO. And so I loved learning about good governance versus bad governance. Another person sort of said building capacity, quite, board capacity. And for us, it's very much about capacity and capabilities in the organization. building highly effective boards, developing effective boards, and all the feedback, as you can see, was very much repetitive. But it also, there were comments like, this session strengthened my capacity. And of course, learning about, training on strengthening the board were some of the favorite comments that were made. And I'm sure some of you have participated in this, and perhaps we can continue to look at some of these key elements as we move on. So just moving into the session itself, there's so many models and approaches we have used in this governance training manual um, about training the board and executive leadership. Certainly for me, it's about, looking at the frameworks that actually, you know, synthesizes for our LIP key staff. Some of them are very new in their organizations. They're passionate about where they're going, but, may not have actually realized that actually there are important elements like board governance. So as you can see, on this slide, it's very much about some of the frameworks, board governance, looking at performance and other key elements, which I'll talk about later, but also some tools and frameworks on when we go into these organizations after the assessments, very much supporting them in saying, okay, this is where you're at and this is where you need to be at. So very much sharing some of these maturity matrices, leadership matrices, where the executive director can also look at themselves as well as their teams to think about, are they still at level 1 vis-a-vis where they need to be, which would be level 5. For us, we often find that actually some of these tools will just really put it on the table for them, the aha moment, as I call, so people can actually start to think this is where we're aiming to go. And of course, a lot of what I will be talking about also comes from some of these. So looking at the board behavioral dynamics, effectiveness of the board, defining what that board is and key board functions, because sometimes people confuse that with the role of the ED. And it's very much about separation of those two key roles. But also looking at the leadership, executive leadership and their SMT responsibilities. Very important in energizing the leaders, in getting them to have that confidence, to have the oversight from the board and work in alignment so they can then measure, which is part of our reporting dashboards and encouraging people to measure what they do. So very much about best practices that I will be talking about in a minute. So a key factor, challenges addressed by training board leadership. It's very much about the capacity gaps I mentioned a few minutes ago. We, identified in the ASAP NUPAS Plus assessments, but also absence of a functioning board is what we tend to find the key challenges in terms of there is a board, but actually it's a token board. And sometimes it's not because people do not know, but sometimes it's about knowing better in terms of what is expected. So this is where we come in. And then this important founder syndrome that we come across, as I mentioned earlier. There's some, if there's a team and indeed organizations who decide to get together and set up an organization, the founder then maintains disproportionate power and influence, which actually can be a real negative. But when we work with colleagues like that, sometimes we also find through this training that they then start to understand we are not going to take away their role, but it's about them allowing others and working with the board and executive leadership and understanding where their role is at and where the board comes in. And of course, that very much talks to senior management struggles to find the right balance, and this affects performance. So within this training, it's about really ensuring the balance between the two. and where do they merge, and where does one leave the board to make sure that there's accountability, to make sure that we're looking at the risks, and also that the executive director feels and the team feel that they're confident. So that right balance and importance towards the performance is pretty key. And then, of course, one of the key things that we often come across, and I guess it's a question, and maybe we can have some answers in the chat. Some LIPs appoint friends who do not have the needed skills to be on the board. How many of us have come across this? It would be interesting to see and hear about your experiences as well, because it's a key challenge that we see. Again, it could be that some people have just got this blind spot that they weren't aware. You start off passionately, but then you need to really look at an organization, and the friends may not be the best knowledgeable and experienced people to support you on the board. And then, of course, you often find in some organizations power that is centralized with no delegation and management support. So it's a few running the organizations, with the others really struggling to either be recognized and indeed or deliver. So that can actually really disturb the organizational structure, systems, and ultimate delivery of their objectives. And then, of course, poor participation by important people, which for me probably talks to the tokenism as well. If the important people, i.e. the board chair, is not working closely with some of the executive team and keeping that enough visibility in the organization to satisfy themselves but not interfere with operations, is another good example of that. And I will talk to that later. And then, of course, there are some local partners that organizations are running in permanent crisis. And I guess to some extent, if you look at some of the challenges I've already discussed, though they can also contribute to this permanent crisis mode. So how do you bring in that emotional intelligence and getting the organizations and the leaders to actually have that control of what they do, possessing that, and driving excellence. And we will come back to that in a moment. And then, of course, sometimes, after assessments, we can, it's very easy sometimes to actually see that maybe the local partner structure is not fit for purpose. And therefore, it's about supporting and advising, training and coaching to make sure that they understand what fit for purpose organization looks like. And it's very much around that clear vision where they drive excellence, focuses on culture, but actually an organization that's fit for purpose very much cultivates innovation. They challenge the status quo. So it's things like that that we really, really look at as we, address these challenges. But also in training board leadership, also asking them, getting the board and the executive leadership to ask themselves about their performance with regards to, finance management. Is money being spent well by the organizations? Have they got the systems in place to ensure that things are happening as they should? So a lot to talk about there, but I'll just stop to see, Mesme, I don't know whether we've got any comments and observations about key challenges before I move on to the next, please. Mesme, are you muted?
So we have a couple of participants from various countries, 18 actually, and we are still having people who are joining a little bit late. So
Yes.
we can open for question. You have a Q&A. You can type your question there. People are thinking about the tools that are available for all participants. They received the link. The link have been sent already. So I don't know if there's any other question that someone wants to ask. We're open for a question now.
Is it necessary to have both? Sorry, go on.
Say it again.
I said, it says here, is it necessary to have board committees or the main board is enough?
Yes, that's a question.
Well, yes, the answer is yes. It's important to have board committees, and I'm happy to share that there will be 2-3 slides on that. It's very important to have what I would call the decision-making committees. They're the board decision-making committees, but they don't actually make the decisions. They make recommendations, and the board would then vote and decide, make decisions based on that. So that's a yes, definitely, and we will, talk about that moving on. Right.
The other question we have is that someone asked how to do to avoid appointing friends as board member. Is there any guidance in engaging or hiring board member?
Certainly, I think there are a few things that one has to consider. I would say, number one, it actually starts with the executive leaders and the founders in the organization having that emotional intelligence to realize that if they're going to set up the organization, it's not about friends and allies, but it's about getting the right people on the board with the right skills at the right time to help and strengthen the governance, which will be a good seller to most of the key stakeholders of that organization. So it's really about having proper structure, recruitment program with job descriptions set out about the key roles of the board, each board member you're looking at. So you would want a diverse board, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, but very much the skills, the experience that they bring to the board, and also their previous experience, which is demonstrable so that you are bringing in the right level people. So we have to recruit our board just as we would do thoroughly with our key staff in the organization.
The last question is related to someone asked, what happened when the board and the donor direction diverse?
Sorry, what happens when the board
and the donor direction diverse? Maybe we can have that answer later on, but if you can address that, would be also helpful.
Later.
But I know that the later you will have the answer of that question. We will keep you on hold.
Okay, perhaps we'll do that. Yeah, okay. So what is the board leadership governance training manual? It's really the objective here, like I mentioned, is to enhance the capacity of board and executive leadership. Like I keep saying, it's not about one and the other because both are important. And also to introduce knowledge of key staff on board governance. But I also always use the word refresh because I'm sure some of us on this platform today, and indeed in our organizations, have got experience in board governance and indeed executive leadership as well. But the manual very much highlights the importance of a board mandate and good governance systems, having the constitution, the board terms of references clearly outlined, the type of board members you will have, expectations on their role on the board, because what we don't want, like what was mentioned in the challenges, is board members who are just going to be a token. They come to meetings, but they've not even read the minutes. And what is important with the mandate, it also clarifies expectations and also evaluation of each of the board members and the board itself, in a timely manner so that it also assesses its performance. So it's really good. They also performance manage the organization, but it's a mandate, the board that actually is very transparent about the skills, its ability, the impact, decisions it makes, but also performance of its own members. And the manual in there, we share effective governance and leadership frameworks, principles of good governance, and the tools. For me, I love the tools because I think it just helps our local partners, our colleagues, just to be able to visualize some of the things that we train them on. So the tools are usually handouts that, I say to them, whether it be a delegation of authority policy, or like I said, a leadership maturity model where they can take away and start to look to say, okay, this is what expected of our organization. We're really good at this, but we need to improve capacity. And if you look at the improvement in areas that we would cover is manage performance of the executive director, very key in training, performance, about finance, well financially, advice management, but also development of strategy. And the board, I think there's always some confusion here. The board's role is the oversight, ensuring that there is a good strategic plan in place and that there's enough resources for the organization to deliver on that. The running of the organizations is for the executive director, of course. And lastly, the objective is to improve the executive's role in strategic leadership, not just people who are managing. So there's a real difference between management and having the right level executive director who is very strategic, very, good skills, ability to manage teams, also able to deal with the challenges that team dynamics bring, but ensuring that team people are performance managed and that the executive director is not interfering on the minutiae, but ensuring that at a strategic level, the road of the organization is such that they will achieve their goals. So very important for within the training manual to ensure our executive leadership are at a strategic level and not just management. And we often look at the differences between that so that people are very clear. And indeed, as I alluded to at the beginning, most of our LIPs, they are new people new in this area. And this board training, its manual is very much about supporting both those who are experienced, but also highlights and gives some tools to the newer members of our local partners. The value proposition again for the training manual is very much, like I said, concepts, clarity. And I like to think at ASAP, most of the organizations that we've talked about, 18, and some colleagues here today, I'm sure you'd agree, you're really starting to get, we talk, walk, good governance and executive leadership. It defines and clarifies the role of the board, ED, and senior management. Let's not forget our senior management, because remember, the executive director cannot do it alone either. So again, it's about having those right level people in executive leadership, working with the executive director at a strategic level so that they understand the big picture and they're delivering and reporting the big picture to the board. And then also we explore and, really take a deep dive to refresh the core skills and competencies required of boards. And it's always very interesting that, I'm sure Mesmi would agree with me on this one, that, some of the board actually, when we deliver training, they suddenly realize, oh my goodness, maybe they know the issues, but maybe they were getting complacent. So the importance of refreshing the board, having an away session, just going through some of the key roles and competencies that they have on the board is pretty key. And maybe this is the time after the training, they start to think, do we actually have the right board members? Because as time goes on, maybe they may not be fit for purpose. Another proposition is very much, areas, like I say, of board leadership and how they set the tone at the top. Again, the top meaning at a strategic level, that ability to have accountability, a formal, transparent system in place to hold people accountable. and be able to share that with their stakeholders, and the stakeholders satisfied that actually this organization is robust in terms of its formal transparency in, and holding people to account. And then looking at how, delegation of authority is managed in the organization. This is where we would expect some policies in place, because as we know, in organizations, there are people, our finance departments and indeed executive leadership are managing a lot of resources. They've got, recently I was working with an organization that has got 6 donors working for them. So that's a lot of resources. So how do you ensure you have enough control systems and delegated authority on where you spend your resources, or how the process of procuring equipment is done, so that we do not have any issues around who is buying what. And sometimes you hear stories of someone who has an uncle and they've decided that the uncle's company would be part of this, providing service to the organization. So transparency and those internal control systems are really important. Policies, tasks that we give to key people, and the processes of ensuring that those systems are active. And that talks to the board, also ensuring that every now and then it's got some systems of checks and balances, and what is being reported in terms of the processes and behaviors is regular, and that they can say they are satisfied everything is going as it should. And of course, next is about ensuring effective governance in board proceedings. Again, a good governance board should always have a very good board reserve meeting schedule. They just don't interfere with too much of the operations. We want the high level information going to the board so that they can have good deliberations and within the governance and the proceedings that the decisions that have to be made. When I say high level issues, it's about issue. For me, I always, and we often at ASAP, encourage that board agenda. There should be financial position reports. There should be some information about the risks, and I'll be talking to risks in a minute, but also, is everything going as it should? Are there any HR issues, the fundamental issues that may impact the organization and indeed the reputation of your local organization? And importantly, also, it's about managing the performance of the executive director. And I'm sure, colleagues in this platform, you would agree with me that must be a challenge for those organizations where maybe people are still new, they are setting up, they're very ambitious, but suddenly now they're thinking it's their baby. But also, working with them to understand that actually strengthening and having that board, just keeping an eye, visibility to support risks and everything is actually pretty key. And when performance management is done for the executive director, and when it's done well, you will find that they actually work well. And I will talk to that in shortly. So the manual covers governance and leadership themes on factors that really create and sustain high-performing board governance teams. And I have to say, we are starting to see these, and it's really lovely to come across the boards. So key messages as well on it's very much about the board functions best when it, like I just said, it focuses on higher level issues. Sorry, I preempted that. But also keeps a keen eye on future oriented matters of strategy and policy. Now, in our strategic plans, we all say, this is where we are, this is where we're going, and you demonstrate how you're going to get there. So at that high level, are we delivering on our goals, on our key performance indicators for each of those managers who are supporting the delivery of the strategic plan? And is the board appraised on any issues. Maybe we've gone offline in terms of what you agreed with some of your key stakeholders, and how do we bring things together? Risk comes into that as well. But also looking at performs its oversight responsibilities in a rigorous but highly efficient manner. And I think in most organizations, what we are looking for is where there is this dynamic between the board and executive leadership about the oversight role, and very much focusing on those things. As you can see on this little diagram, it's there's a diagram there saying, somebody jumping. Where are we with the organization? Where are we going? But also the risks. What are those? Are we identifying them? Are we assessing where we are? How often do we meet processes of risks that are really dangerous? And are we aware of those? Very clear. Hence the torch that's should always be focusing on the organization. Why is board development important? Again, like we're saying, it's about ensuring there's highly effective boards out there. It's one of the fundamental drivers of local partner performance. And honestly, can't reiterate this enough. In this time of change, our stakeholders, our other partners are also expecting that, and that is really fundamental to the life and longevity of the organization. So it's pretty important to always refresh on that and asking yourselves, where are we on that? So as I've alluded to, the key roles of the board, not to interfere with the organization, but high-level strategy, risks, resources, and achieving the goals, pretty key. Holding the organization accountable for its progress on some of those areas and in achieving the strategic goals. But oversight responsibilities, that one, we never apologize for that. A key question is money being spent well. And how does your board answer this question? And is it answered every quarter? Are there any areas that maybe you need to tweak? Are there any areas of risk that you've not identified? And who is responsible to ensure that everything is happening as it should? And that talks also to shaping the culture of the organization. So in this training, it's very much about bringing into the organization that confidence to work as a board and executive leadership, but with the trust and ensuring accountability. And once that culture is set, it's always really good in terms of where you are with the role of the board, really. So one of the things that we certainly in each of the modules of the training manual, we start with an exercise. So you will find throughout the tools and some sections. So a good example of this one would be what is good governance, allowing the participants to really, take a deep dive on what they understand, so that then, within that, there will be some information around the principles of governance and really gets to, again, explain clearly to the participants what that means so that they can relate to it. Another example of an exercise would be what challenges are faced by the board of directors. It's a very good question, and I'm sure some of us who've been in trainings and indeed are looking forward to that, you would immediately start to think some of the challenges that you're facing, and it would be great to hear from you in the chat about some of those and how have you overcome any challenges. And then, of course, that allows engagements with the participants. It allows them to share their stories. And I think good facilitation of board governance and executive leadership training is very much about learning from the stories, not criticizing, but actually, like I say, the aha moment. Oh my goodness, we had this happen. Perhaps we should have done it this way. Exchange ideas, solutions with others, so that the training is actually very, very participative and people feel enabled to talk, empowered to be open whilst looking for the challenges and the solutions that come up during those trainings modules. So I think it would be pretty much started to cover this already. For me, this diagram sums it up in terms of what the board governance is really. It's the board of directors, management, stakeholders, and the role within that. It's the leadership involved in decision making. And culture comes in. Culture, the tone that's in the organization. Maybe in a moment, we'll also want to hear about some of how you are setting that right culture and having the right control systems so that people don't feel they are being checked on, but actually it's a day-to-day thing that allows the organization to survive. And that when things are not happening, how accountability is delivered from the boardroom and throughout the organization. And ultimately, it's about great outcomes, consistent outcomes. So it's really about capable people delivering great outcomes and making the world a better place. I'll just stop there for a minute. Any comments, observations? Feel free. Questions?
Yeah, Petronella, there's very, very interesting, very, very interesting. I want to just to summarize some question that comes in where you were presenting related to one is this hearing participant may be interesting to hear from your side, and maybe I will jump in also on our experience in board remuneration and whether there's a standard or acceptable practice on this. And the second question is related to also to the fact that some participants say the local partners sometimes are not able to secure best board member because of the cost, because some people with high level skill are not willing to provide the support at no cost. And sometimes also somebody asks a question related to the how do we assess board skill? Is there any way we can have is there any tool standard that we need to share? And also whether it's possible to also advertise and hire board member as we used to do with a standard position in the management team. And finally, there's an interesting question related to the transition process within the board and the mandate as well as rotation when it comes to board functioning and membership. So hand over to you first, and I'm willing to provide comment on the first as well. Over.
I was going to ask you to talk about remuneration, Ms. May.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
Please
you.
do.
Thank you. I think it's a very sensitive question that participants are asking. I think we local partner, we decide to set up our internal rule and regulation as well as the schedule. This webinar help us to have more in-depth information for us to sometime revisit what we submitted before. Sometimes people are rushing to get the statute and internal regulation approved because they want to apply for any funding opportunity, and then sometimes it's not really clear on what is the board role first, what's their responsibility, as well as how did they want to engage the board and to specify whether there's any remuneration. I have experience of one organization in Cote d'Ivoire where they started like that, but sometime after they decided to review their statute and to engage with some donor, a conversation about their role and responsibility. But they have to do first step is to define the scope of work of the board member, having, to document how often they have been, they meet and have the minute of the meeting, have report available, document everything that they are doing, and I'll try to estimate also the cost related to the board support. Based on this, they were able to discuss and negotiate with this donor on how to charge something related to that. I recall also the fact that during our local partner meeting with USAID recently in I think it was in Ghana, we also had opportunity to go into detail on the indirect cost expenses, and we also noticed that there are some minor allowable costs that can be charged to support board meetings, sometime having transport reimbursement and etc. But a lot of organizations themselves in their statutes, they say that board roll rounds are free of charge. And this is something is already mentioned in our statute. And we need to comply with what we also committed to do, because it depends on the objective of the organization, the mission of the organization, and also the scope of work. And it's not just things related to the cost per se. So I'll post here and also based on the donor, regulation in terms of what is acceptable or not. But I think before we go to negotiation, let's see in our internal document how this can be addressed, and to realistically document it, and to be simple as well. Over.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, in a nutshell, it's about you, like Mesme said, having the right, job description, person specification, dialogue with some of the potential candidates, so they understand that they should not be expecting to be paid, as Mesme said, maybe through some indirect costs. But and I think at that moment, then you would have to make a decision that that person might not be right for the organization. Because what you don't want is to end up with people who cause you problems and or will not be committed, because they will, just turn up, they will not be part and deliver on supporting the organization. So I think it's really important, as you recruit those members, to ensure that there's clarity and that there's a link, and they understand the terms of references for your board, that there's clarity about not expecting, a lot of money out of it. I think it's very important. In terms of the board skills, I'm going to be talking about it shortly. They've got a board skills matrix to share, which is a tool that I think, perhaps, especially now we're talking about, not having friends and allies, but looking at experience, we can look into that much more. And that's something then you would also, ensure that you clarify in a person specification on your advert, so you're getting the right level people. But I think when you're looking to recruit board members, it's very important to use your connections and networks. People who've worked in programs, or other aids organizations, who may be really good for your organization, because they will also understand the laws and the compliance issues that are expected. So it's how you tap into some of those. You have, as executive leadership in the organization, one of your key things is about networking, key stakeholder management, and some of those people will assist you to tap into some of the good board members who will not bring you problems, but will contribute to good governance and outcomes in the organization. So that's really how you do it. And so one of the things, if we were doing training for executive leadership, I often ensure that there's something about your own skills in having good networks, right networks with the right skills, or using others to tap into those, so that you keep it nice, friendly, but formal as well. Really important. And of course, that will also talk to their commitment, clarity about what is expected of their role, as they're coming in, time commitment would be really clear. So setting the scope of work clearly would be really important to that. So I guess we can move on to the next one, please. Let me just, yeah. So this section, again, I think I pretty much talked about what it covers, but also lastly, critical board activities, and of course the policies and procedures which I mentioned. And then there'll be a section on the components of a balanced board, which is where I'm going to talk about the skills matrix in a short while. Characteristics of board members, like I've just alluded to, very key. What type of people do we want? And for me, you have to include emotional intelligence. Yes, they may have knowledge in, other areas, but also what are they as a person? And of course, looking at the relationship between those key areas. So a key question is, when does the board get involved with management? Because as you can see, when we look at functioning, the board, I keep talking about the two, but they work in alignment. So what are the key things that you would expect the board to get involved with management? And maybe shortly, Mesme, we can share that. But in the meantime, I'll just share this board skills matrix, an example of, which is a very simple tool, but would be useful to your organization in terms of looking at the technical skills and experience. Of course, you will have talked about your strategy, your goals, where you're going, but now what sort of board members do we also need? And is it about accounting, finance, legal, as you can see, industry experience? So maybe people with NGO experience, and maybe they've been a board member or trustee somewhere else, HR or service operations. So, that is very important. And then, of course, you would use these columns to plot who you have and indeed who you want to target. But focus also on director capabilities. Are they able to assimilate and synthesize complex information? Because those reports to the board, will they be able to follow what they're being told and help to make decisions? Capacity to develop and deliver logical arguments as a board member. Looking at innovative thinkers with some leadership ability, and I often find people like that will support the executive director as well. Time availability. So again, if people are pushing and they want some money, no, we're not going to engage that. But also, that availability of that individual to contribute to the organization. And also looking at interpersonal and relationship management skills. So it's very important, like I said, you outline a job description, but also the person specificate. What sort of, soft skills do we want from these individuals? And you ensure that there is a system to assist you to make sure you get the right level people. It should be really a proper recruitment process. And of course, also looking at your gender policies, gender, female, male, in deciding if the board is a bit, not too many women and only one male, perhaps you need to look at your board balance as well. But personal attributes, honesty and integrity, ethical standards, network of relevant. Remember, I've just said you want people who can help you network. Networking means opening up opportunities. They know someone, who will assist, in your area type of thing, really. So that's the skills matrix. I don't know if there are any comments and quick observations. Is this something that people have used before?
Any questions?
Certainly a tool that I think will be useful. Sorry, miss me.
I'm asking if somebody can act on the chat or Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts?
And then
comment?
we can come back. Yeah.
Maybe we'll come back after.
Yes,
as
sure.
they're tracking it. Mhm.
Sure. So it's all about a successful relationship between the board chair and the ED. The chair runs the board, which is the governing. The chief executive director runs the organization. They have a mutual respect for each other. The CEO, and I'm not saying the chief exec should go pick board members there, but at least once you're starting to settle in on someone, they should also have an opportunity to meet and understand what the organization is about. But the CEO and the chair should have clarity of their roles. Very key. And what does that mean? Board led by the chairperson defines expectations for the organization, strategy, granting power, ensuring compliance with that board charter, accountability and compliance with the laws and regulations of the charitable, organizations as well as in the country, but also maintains proper fiscal oversight. Management led by executive director, taking direction from the board, communicates expectations, implementing strategy and policies, looking at short-term and long-term plans, day-to-day operations. And of course, most of us will have had funding for programs. So it's very important because it's one that can be risky as well. Program implementation to fulfill expectations and report results to the board. So you can see the differences here. Develop strategy with the teams, but the teams implement strategy and policy. Very clear, and it's important that people are often reminded of that. And then there was a question which we had earlier about if boards, board committees. Yes, it's very important to have boards committees set up. They are an extension of the board and not of the executive leadership. And they will assist the board with their oversight responsibilities. Remember, enough visibility on risks, enough visibility on finance management, checks and balances, that things are ticking as they should, and there's no misappropriation of any issues, funds, otherwise, but also prepare the board decision making. So they look into the finance committee, for example, and then they will make a recommendation for board decision, depending on what this issue is with the executive team. And each committee should have clear terms of references, and that's chaired by a board member with expertise, and they deal with specific issues, like I've said, finance, HR, fundraising. Some people actually have program, especially if you have huge programs, committees, just so, because ultimately it's about advisory, not making decisions, but it also helps in terms of oversight role of risks that may come up with the committees. As I say, each committee has a charter, defines responsibilities, and addresses linkages with the broader executive team and the board of directors. They should also understand the types of decisions, events, risks, and other items that should come to the committee's attention and chaired at the board. There are also that entity that should be clear about the methods of escalating and reporting any issues that may come up. For example, an HR issue with one, executive member or some important member out there that can impact on the organization. Escalation is very important, and reporting significant matters to the ED, board, or the committee. But also committees should establish independence and authority of the control functions around compliance, risk, legal, finance, and audit as well. So very important clarity of the terms of references, and everyone in the organization understanding, if I participate in this committee, I'm not there to make decisions, but it's for the board. Any issues will be escalated on that board reserved matter agenda I talked about earlier on. And then, of course, the manual is very much about risk management. And you know, it's every section talks about risk oversight. And it's really a section that is important in terms of giving the overview what risks are, what is risk, types of risks, and the distinction between risk oversight and risk management. We expect the organization to, to have a risk management plan, work with the board on the fundamental ones. So you identify risks, you measure the risks, the intensity, roles and responsibility in risk management, and come up with steps to manage those risks. Very fundamental in the organization. And again, the role here continued is very much also using the tools on, to help you deliver on risks. As, looking at the examples of structure, that's what sometimes we work on with local partners. You need that system where you will be identifying the risk and their causes, and then ensuring that risk analysis and assessment is happening. We have a designated person, implementing that, looking at the likelihood of some of your risks and the impact that some risks may have on the organization. Some quantitative information as well as qualitative. What does people say about some of these risks? And then looking at risk treatment, which is how are you going to, what mechanisms would you put in place? Actions and mechanisms to minimize the risks. And for each risk, there is always whether, are you going to, do you accept this risk? Something to live on, or what are the key actions? How can we prevent that happening? You're really looking at a deep dive here. And then, of course, ensuring monitoring and reviewing and continuously those risks and actions to control them. Very much a board oversight role here, but working in partnership with the executive team, of course. And we often, and you will find that in the training manual as well, we talk about, each organization having a risk heat map where you can just plot simply red, amber, green, amber, red there, where the red are the big, hairy risks that you encounter. Plotting them, assigning people to them, defining what those risks are, looking to prevent, detecting, correcting, and escalating. And of course, the bigger the impact, those of the ones in red would be the ones usually discussed at the board. You don't expect every risk to be discussed at the board, but there needs to be an executive leadership risk management plan where there are day-to-day issues discussed. But when they get to finance, when they get to some of the important compliance stakeholder concerns, then maybe the board has got to be on top of that as well. So these tools are there, but also in the training manual, very much some key questions that we would expect you to be asking yourselves. What could stop us from achieving our priority? Because risk can really destroy the organization. What could ruin our reputation? What could ruin our financial position? And what could put us out of business as a, charitable organization? What has happened in other governance failures that we can learn from? So this is where, again, your networks can help you understand what other organizations like your one are, challenges they are facing, and how are they dealing with that? Because the grapevine will help you as well to address the risks. So there's a big section on risks. And then the last big section is Module 4, which is very much about board performance, as we are moving on to then have some discussions after this. And this section really has got a lot of tools, again, and resources for each local partner, each local partner board as well, to really tap into, whether it's with the board looking at the good governance principles and how can they check themselves on what they're performing, how their performance is going. Sample code of conduct for directors. We share some of those, but we also take you through that and the importance of the code of conduct, who is responsible, and keeping an eye on that. But also, I talked about delegation of authority policy, very clear. This one is not to be ignored because it's important to the executive team, but to the board as well, such that they've got that insight into the organization and who has got authority on what, ensuring that we don't, delegate to, inexperienced individuals who may cause harm to the organization. So really important on that, worth spending time on. And then, like I said earlier, board self-evaluation tools as well. The expectation is that each board should evaluate its performance every year. You evaluate, board members evaluating the board chair evaluating each of the board members, but also board members giving feedback on the performance of the executive director and looking on areas that they need to improve on, and jointly looking overall at both sides in terms of performance. And of course, board performance is about also those board meeting procedures. Don't have meetings, in the training, we are trying to avoid meetings for this meeting's sake, but ensuring that those meetings are effective and that you're homing in on the key high level issues and dealing with the risks as well. So performance generally of the board and executive leadership is pretty key. And I often, advocate this governance operating framework, or there are other tools that you will find that with, referenced in the board training manual, but very much tools that give you a focus and enables you to set up a system to make decisions. Who is making decisions in the organizations, and indeed, or are key decisions being passed on to the board so that they, they keep an eye on some key fundamental issues. The structure, it's about looking whether you have a structure that has the potential to enhance the board's exercise of proper oversight and management's ability to implement governance. This is where the board has set policies. Are those policies being implemented in the organization? A good example, conflict of interest, very key. Are people declaring conflict? Have we got a system in place to monitor? And if a conflict of interest issue comes up, how significant is it? And is that being discussed with the board if it's a significant one, and the impact of it as well? So looking at that exercise, and that diagram, why I love it is because the green is the board governance role. Performance, strategy, governance, talent, the right people in the right place. Do we have the right people on the bus? And do we want to drop off some? But also integrity. And then the blue is the executive leadership, running the organization, the planning, the reporting, the monitoring, compliance, all that is really important. But for both, culture of the board is important, as well as the culture in the organization. Who is monitoring the culture? What is the temperature range of the culture in the organization? Is it an explosive culture where people are not listened to and only individuals are running, or is very mutual and everybody's signed up and that people are doing and performing as they should? And within that, managing all the risks of governance, but as well as of the organization. And such a tool would also allow you to just take a step back during training, to, in group exercises, or if you facilitate your away sessions, looking at a high level governance, performance, strategy, integrity, and the people issues. Asking yourselves on each, how can we improve governance? Does everything look as it should? So performance. Who is responsible? Are we delivering on our strategy as expected? Who is reporting on what? Are we on target? And also, who needs to be involved? What are the key issues to do with integrity of the people running the organization, integrity within the programs out there, but also looking at people in terms of who needs to act on it. And I think if you apply that, and in the training, we really focus a lot around this issue, I would be asking for the organization to do some exercises around this. But also now looking at the board monitoring the executive management operations, the planning, operations, reporting, culture, and risks. Always asking, why are we doing this? Will this help to ensure that every tactic leads to improved performance, so that you really take a deep dive in each of those areas and reporting happens all the time? So that's again the exercise that I've just been talking. As I say, this will help ensure that every tactic in the organization leads to improved performance. You end up listing the key priority areas and any other that may, come up as well. So using some of these frameworks to support and train, very important. And of course, again, reiterating the board key areas that, we expect the board to pay attention to. I probably won't read most of these because we know strategy, clear vision and all that, but also communication of the strategy to staff and stakeholders. A key thing that should be in your strategic plan is a stakeholder management one page, your plan to manage stakeholders, and what that talks to where if you're delivering on your roadmap, your strategic goals, there may be issues that come up. But it's important to have that dialogue, communication, relationship with your stakeholders, because what we don't want is to only start mixing with the stakeholders when things go wrong. So it's how you apply your strategic leadership to it. But leadership and decision making, that there is evidence of mentoring and nurturing of leadership in the organization. It's not about one person, but it's the team, and there's a focus there. They are delivering and managing those conflicts that may come. The accountability, people are clear about that. There's also attention to results, which is key, but also style, structures, decision-making, and communication of decisions. And then, of course, the legal setup of governance, which we've talked a lot about. Those structures and compliance is pretty key. And then also looking in the organization, alignment of structure to strategy. Is there a link there? Sometimes you might have a very good, ambitious goals and, mission and, strategic actions, but actually, do you actually have the right structure to deliver on it? You may need to take a step on that and review. So the adequacy of the structure to fulfill your organizational needs is very important. Clarity of roles and responsibilities, being mindful of individuals who might take you downwards instead of going up. Effective chain of command, who is responsible, who is working with the board, who is doing what. And of course, the interdepartmental relationships are key. Otherwise, it will make or break it for the organization. And then, of course, the culture, dominant characteristics, looking at, impact of culture on the performance and sustainability of optimum performance in, improvement in the organization is pretty key. And then, of course, we always ask you to have some questions for the board in performance management. What areas should we be spending time on? How do we align the board and management? And I'm sure I've talked about alignment a lot. I'm sure now I hope you're starting to think, okay, what can we do with ours tweak a few things here so that you are all talking the same language. Each one is respecting each other. Remember the expectations of the chair and the expectations of the executive director and the team. How do we make decisions? How do we communicate those decisions? And how do we ensure that decisions are followed or escalated to the board? So the training really helps you to start to look at some of the elements, key important things on mitigating risks as well, escalation, but mitigating risks. Number 7 is another very important one. How do we position the board as a strategic partner with management? Remember, strategic, high level, very much about key decisions, driving excellence, and that culture and cultivating, innovation in the organization. But also, what should we specifically do in the critical areas of oversight, such as strategy and risk, and of course, the work of the committees? Does it relate or differ from the work of, the board, the management, and everybody else as well? Just a short pause as we go to finish in the next 6-7 minutes. Me, any questions,
Thank
observations,
you
or
so
comments
much.
from people?
Yeah, that comment. I think a lot of questions have been addressed.
Yeah.
But I want to acknowledge and I mentioned one comment from a participant who said that most of the board members in local organization are not trained in their role and responsibility. That is why they are not able to deliver. And he also indicated that it's critical that they themselves as attendees now will take over advantage of this presentation and get started earlier to address the gap that they have in their organization. I think it's a strong commitment from this training, and I'm happy that somebody deal with that. So one question also and comment is related to the fact that somebody asked how to reduce the effect of the funder on board selection based on their own interests. It's a very interesting question. And the second question is also whether who is responsible to for picking the board member? Is it an individual or management responsibility? And if you have any experience in to share about the minimum number of member in the board committee, what do you recommend in considering the fact that they will also be divided into subcommittee? Over.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think the comment about most board members are not trained is very common, especially in our type of organizations. And again, it just depends on the history of how the organization has been set, which is why now we're mentoring, coaching, and really giving them the tools to that. So that's actually what I would call another aha moment, where now once they know, even the board members themselves I've had board members say, oh my goodness, I wish we'd had this training ages ago because I didn't really quite understand my role. So it works both ways. It supports the executive leadership, the running of the organization, but it strengthens the role of the board, and also then it stops the interference actually. And the other question around how to ensure the founder that the founder is not too involved in the recruitment selection of members. The recruitment of the board members should be really with the board. And I know that obviously, as if it's a new organization that's just starting, yes, usually you have, the executive director kind of having to support that as they strengthen the board. But ultimately, there needs to be clarity that the board is the one that decides the capability, the capacity that each of the people they want, if they want to be a real effective board. That skills matrix would help. Yes, it's not about pushing the executive director away, it should be joint up thinking with, with the board chair. Presumably you start with someone who's kind of acting chair, and indeed they then start looking at all the, where they're going. But ultimately, job description, clear skills and experience that's needed, but ensuring that it's being done transparently and that you're really targeting the right level people and not just bringing people who are well known. And I think now we are moving towards, I know Mesme and I have been talking about, that declaration of conflict of interest, that you ensure that on that board, that is dealt with, and you don't end up with people who know each other and they've not declared. And then you find that when decisions are being made, there's always an ulterior motive within that. It works for a while, but ultimately it might bring the organization down. So it's well worth looking at the structure really well and recruiting the right level people. And networking is really important on that. And also, I think, was it a question about the board members'
Um,
experience
yeah,
on
the
the
experience,
committee?
yeah, the number of board members from that you can recommend, and considering the fact that they will function with subcommittee also, how many members do you think is advisable?
Yeah, so board members overall on the board itself, depending on the organization and some of the committees you will decide on. And usually, we have like 8 members, and on each there is an expertise in finance, HR, fundraising, and or, maybe programs in other areas. So, or compliance, and, making sure that there's also audit, sometimes they do finance and audit committees. So it's about really ensuring you've got enough members to participate on the board. So the size of the board is very important, and the number is really important as well. We usually, promote an even number of board members so that you can vote as well. So all that in this training manual, you will find this a lot of guidance, and we cover that quite a lot. Very topical. So soft skills, expertise, but looking at the numbers and also looking at the gender split of the board members as you decide on key roles in it. And I think with the board committees, you will be co-opting senior management onto that, usually 1 or 2 board members, depending on how big the issues, that you expect the board members to contribute to, but very much chaired by a board member. I don't know, maybe you want to
Yeah.
add on to that, or does that suffice?
Yeah, I think just experience from some country where we have it's quite important to see that sometime you can have one board member who is sitting
Mhm.
in 2 subcommittees, sometime in audit or maybe in finance, or
Yeah.
it happened like that. But uh, it depends really, as you said, but at least for each subcommittee should have at least 3 people. That is,
Yes.
is good for voting process, to ensure that at least we meet the minimum for decision making. There's a question that needs to maybe your attention also, is about the training of the board. How is this done? Is it the board training? Is it done? I mean, is HIP to get this manual and then conduct the training? Who is supporting this? How the training is supported? Is it under the donor funds? This is a question from the chat. I mean,
I think it will vary, I'm sure, as we roll out. I think, normally we are capacity advisors. Last week I trained 5 different boards in a country. And it's very much having someone, obviously, who is with the ability to be able to train the board. I can't imagine that you would expect executive leadership to do that. So it's really looking at discussing and actually coming up with us. With that's part of our role anyway. So I'm sure Ms. May can add to that. But it's very much ensuring it's someone who understands the both levels and is able to engage the board and executive leadership. And usually with our trainings, we want people to be comfortable enough not to challenge healthy challenge, but also coming up with solutions such that it's done in a mutual way and that they're learning from it. And once they leave, there's key actions that they're going to do because they will have started to identify some of these. So it's about looking at who's the best, really. But we at ESAP, we usually, there's usually people supporting you on that, and I'm sure most of you online would have had the NUPAS assessments, and that's part of that growth area. I don't know, Miss May, if you want to jump in, or is that okay?
Yeah, I think that's why we in ASAP and USAID also through this webinar we are giving resources, but we want to engage to ask people to join some community of practice we provide on also our webinar. You usually have the calendar. You can bring in your board team to join them, then listen. It's already offered, but then you have internal resources to provide support. You can do, let me say, a dissemination meeting based on the training and the presentation we are sharing. I think it's also another part, but we are here to continue supporting. It's not an easy task. It takes time, and we need to continue coaching organizations to strengthen their board and to have a very strong board to support the organization.
Yeah, and I'm sure once you get these slides, I can imagine, both parties sitting and just going through that. There'll be a lot that would actually assist in looking at where your pain points are in the organization, and then starting to look at addressing that as well as learning. So it could be very much informal, but also formalized training is always useful as well. So just in ending, the next steps with your board, obviously there's recommendations in the manual as well, but it's deciding what the board should look like, talk about identifying capabilities you need on the board. And it's not just having a prominent person from the community, but what specific skills are they going to bring on the board? Very key. Consider having the board represent social and cultural diversity of itself, depending again on your strategy, and literally looking like the organization and the people it serves. You also need to determine how well the board currently measures up, having open, honest discussions, like I've just said. Maybe the slides would have that, about the makeup of the board and extent to which it meets its organization's defined needs. Pretty key. And have the proper documentation, the charter, bylaws that state how long each board member should serve. So the board member tenure is really important, and not just keeping people for the sake of it. And also ensuring that they are also evaluated by the chair, but evaluating themselves as an overall board to determine whether, a member, he or she, has performed expectations, but also including the chair members and the ED within that. So as we finished, I've said a lot about oversight responsibility, always clarifying that, determining the skills and knowledge the board requires. Because once you know where your pain points, your gaps are, then you start to really execute oversight responsibilities. Engaging management mutually. Remember, cheering each other rather than fighting in providing the information the board requires. And that is where I'm sure, my colleagues, advisors, if they are online as well, will say this is an area that you really need to address. Don't leave it to when something has gone wrong. Share information, that openness, addressing the risks as opposed to being reactive to the risks. Advice management on policies. Those policies are not just to go on in your folders. How active are they? Are they being, highlighted to key staff? Are they signing to say they've read it and they understand? And then when it comes to disciplinary, at least you're covered there. And then understanding governance activities that occur at various levels within the organization, so that, governance framework is a good example of just checking in, is everything as it should, what should be happening here, and support management in its efforts to enhance program efficiency and effectiveness. And I added this slide, about the board's role and issues to consider. I love it because it looks at the key characteristics. Number one, leadership, clarity, vision, priorities, but very much about cohesive leadership. And that's what we're expecting, training and, really, enhancing in the organizations, decision-making and structure, clear roles and accountabilities for decisions, organizational structure that supports those objectives, but also looking at the people, organizational and individual talent necessary for success. Are the people that we started the organization with still fit for purpose? Do we need to enhance and or build on that? Having performance measures and incentives aligned to objectives. And then, of course, the work processes and systems, execution of programmatic work processes, superior, effective and efficient support of those processes and systems. It's a really good thing to have in this to make your organization and board strong, but also high performance values and behaviors with that capacity to change and not just say it's business as usual. And of course, that also talks to the culture. You need to really think through, and we talk about that in our trainings, very much about the signs of possible problems with the organizational culture is a must in training because it can make it or break it for the organization. That culture could be a culture of silo thinking, where you're only looking this way, you're not looking left, right, and everywhere else. So you need to look holistically at the organization. Dominant executive director might be good, started, is in that position, but it's not about the ED alone. Making sure that there is joint up working and thinking with the board, and that person has got the right level skill set. Arrogant leadership, need to be aware of that. And how do you address this? The board chair's role in performance managing the executive leadership. Pressure to meet numbers or over ambitious targets. This is where, remember, the role of the board in oversight, training the organization on both sides so that you look at the targets that they're working on, but then the board asking and the right questions so that you can deliver on that. Some signs of possible problems: lack of access to information. If you don't know, then you're likely to end up with some issues there. Low levels of meaningful engagement between leadership and the staff. So there's the board there, and then the leadership, there's not much engagement. Does the board sometimes actually get an opportunity to just, walk the walk to see what's really happening there? That's important as a culture, because you may find that some staff are just sitting there with their heads down because they are told to do that. So you need, lack of openness to challenge. Challenging in a nice, mutual, constructive way is what you need to be looking at. Because that culture where people are not able to challenge can be difficult as well. And then is it a culture of tolerance of breaches of regulations and code of ethics? You'll be surprised. Some organizations allow these things and they think they can get away with it, which I think is sad, because then it takes away from the vision and the mission of why the organization is there. So it's really looking at that risk appetite and looking at some of those key areas that are important. And of course, a culture of short-term focus is no good, because, it could be that you may not survive as an organization. So culture of the organization is pretty key. And I'm sure people on this platform must be looking at some of these and thinking, oh, maybe that's us. And how do you know that? It's about looking at some of the turnover absenteeism rates in the organization. Are people trained? Is there data to say that people are really learning as well? Recruitment, reward, promotion. It's not just about giving people money, but reward in terms of the way, people's sense of belonging and, that psychological safety of our staff in the organization. Use of non-disclosure agreements. This is one key area we're looking more and more towards, very important, so that you are, not having these sudden issues that happen and you don't have the right systems in place to address that. Whistleblowing, grievance, and speak up data is always also another way of the board and executive leadership really looking into the culture and how things and people are managed. Employee surveys, do you often check in on that? Board interaction with senior management and the workforce, every now and then take that step, as I said. But also looking at things like procurement, promptness of payments to suppliers, attitudes towards regulators, internal audits and employees, and exit interviews. That you might get a lot of insight into how things are in the organization and looking to address some of those key areas, really. And of course, lastly, as I got to finish, it's about a board and executive that works well, the composition works, respect and trust among all board members, strong team spirits exist, emotional intelligence, always putting yourself in other people's position, managing in an emotionally intelligent way instead of, shouting and people are afraid of the board and or executive. The board spending time, this is a repetition, building quality of the relationship between individual members, the board, and senior leadership. Board cheering the executive leader and the staff as well when progress has been made, because we tend to focus on the negative as opposed to looking at the positive as well. And of course, the board being an ally for the ED and the sounding board or trusted advisor to the team, ED and the team as well. And you will find in the manual some maturity models that I've mentioned. I will not repeat this, but they will also help you to just look where you are in terms of your current effectiveness and capabilities. An example would be in your slides, very much looking at each area, governance, leadership, just looking, are we at number one, forming, or are we now innovating? We've got best practices or we've got strong practices. Use some of these tools to train and, departments so they can really give you a picture of where you're at. And that's what the manual is very good at with that, including a maturity module, even on the risks. Is as an organization, are we still unaware, which is number one, or it's fragmented, or top down, or we are very systematic now? We've established that oversight and understand we've created a culture of risk. Or number five, which is top notch, the board has established oversight and is constantly seeking ways to influence and improve if the culture of risk awareness is present. So very much about looking where each of your organization is at. And this has got lots of sections around it as well to help you really use the tool. And also surrounding yourself with the right people, with the right skills to do the right job at the right time, and very much looking at having the right level staff. This tool is just asking you, who have you got in your leadership pipeline? Is it just about the ED and the others are mundane, or you've got some high pros, some people who can help you to deliver on your strategy? And those who are a bit rough at the bottom there, the low performers, inconsistent performers, diamond on the rough, they're a bit rough, but they actually, if we unleash their potential, they will deliver. It's very important to be thinking about that as a board and executive leadership, and then actually coming up with some action plans to improve on performance. And then lastly, it's about having a board that actually checks in on on themselves, what type of board they are. So this will be in your slides. It's about personality boards, the good and bad about them, and their mantra being trust me. The people board, they always say involve me, but that board is about relationships and, often highly creative, people-oriented chair and CEO. The personality one is a strong character. And then performance, Chair and executive, often peacemaker, consensus builders. They always say, show me. And policy is about chair or CEO, often very analytical, precise, driven by rules and policy. This is another tool which is really great to just think and reflect as you're being trained, and if you're working with the board, what sort of board are we? There's good and bad in it. What is our greatest fear? As you can see at the bottom there, is just to really, it could be a good exercise so that the board can analyze itself in a nice mutual way, really, as an example of that. So some closing thoughts. Why this training manual and coaching are key. Again, accountability. Great board members hold themselves and the organization accountable. Passion for the mission. Their passion is sincere and contagious, helping to promote others' enthusiasm for the mission. Donor access and modeling. Great board members demonstrate a financial commitment to the organization and provide access to others who can do the same, but it's also how you manage those stakeholders as well. Big picture view, they view the mission through a strategic, not operational lens, and they are inquisitive in nature. So board members are not afraid to ask hard or frequent questions in striving towards progress. So that's what this is all about. I think I've really, talked a lot about this. I will not read these, but you just work on your pain points, changing behavior, and really train the trainer will be key as well. So finally, the boarding manual, shares our combined years of experience. A lot of people contributed as well in guiding and coaching boards and executives, and includes all the best key areas, practices, and templates. So special thanks to contributors, to ASAP leads, our ASAP advisors, you local implementing partners, and thank you. And here it ends this session. Over to you, Mesmi, as well.
Thank you. On my side, Petronella, no more question. Most comment appreciation that people are sending on the chat and Q&A. And I think that I'll hand over to for last word from Melissa. Over.
Thank you, Mesmi, and thank you, Petronella, for an excellent presentation. Thank you to everybody for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again at a future webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And sharing of info, you've already said.
Oh, yes. Again, the presentation, as well as a recording of today's webinar, will be available at the ASAP Resources website, and I'll send that right now in the chat. As well as the training manual and any tools are available on our ASAP Resources page. It's a excellent place to go for anything additional that you need. There's other leadership and governance webinars also available on the ASAP Resources page, so feel free to use that resource however it is that you need it. So thank you so much for joining us. And thanks again, Petronella and Mesmi, for an excellent presentation and Q&A facilitation.
Thanks to you, Melissa. We appreciate you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.